Training breakdown, yeah. So for me, the key thing to there is it is not all slow mileage. Now, everyone, most of your training, a huge percentage of your training will likely be done faster than your actual race pace. And that's probably quite unusual in a lot of endurance running. Certainly if you're used to doing the short distance stuff, very little of your training, your weekly volume will be done faster than your race pace. If you're a 5K or a 10K, probably even a half marathon, and even down to a marathon to an extent, a lot of it will be run at your race pace or slower, or slower if you're on those shorter distances. Of course, when you're doing an ultra run and you may be running for 15-minute miles, a lot of you are probably going to be training at 12-minute miles. So again, when we go back about race prep as well, factoring that into some of your longer runs where you practice that pace, so you get used to that rhythm as well. But when it comes to training, I think it's still important to include a little bit of sort of speed work in your training as well, because what we're going to try to do is improve our running economy. So if we can maybe shift our lactate turning point a little bit with a few targeted sort of key speed sessions throughout the sort of training phases, then what's that going to mean to us? We're going to need less energy at that 14-minute mile, so it's going to feel much more comfortable. So we can possibly even stick up a little bit faster. So it's definitely worthwhile doing that. Because of course, like I said, it's very difficult to not run faster than race pace. I think for me as well, the base training comes first, because of course you've got to be able to endure the distance. There's very little point in having a fantastically high VO2 max if the most quality mileage you can do is 10 miles, because you're going to find a very challenging day when it comes to race day. So build that base first. For me, that's critical. Then after that, for me, really the next big thing, I think, comes the nutrition and the GI training. So when I talk about the GI training, that's training our guts to tolerate taking the sort of fuel and hydration that we're going to be taking on race day. So I always say to athletes I work with, let's practice that in our races. Make sure we're getting the same sort of nutrition that we plan to do on race day. We'll practice during training for a few reasons. One reason, we'll discover if it works. So does this particular brand of gel or this brand of bar work for this athlete? Or not, as the case may be. Also, can he or she tolerate it? So after, there might become a defined moment where all of a sudden, 5 hours into a race, that really, really sweet, sticky gel that was fantastic for you early on, you can't bear it anymore and you need to flip to something else. So it's better to discover all that whilst you're training, and you can also improve your ability to ingest and synthesize the fuels that you're taking board by doing that in your training as well, because you'll be more your gut will learn how to do that whilst you're in transit. So that's worthwhile doing that, and that's something that is a huge benefit that is often underutilized, particularly in sort of more novice ultra runners. So that's a huge benefit. And again, we talked about being sort of course and race specific. So I guess for me, the first three things in order of preference for me is the base has to come, and then after that we have to make sure we can get the nutrition bang on, because if the base isn't there, you're going to struggle. But if you've got the base there but your nutrition's poor, you're going to struggle. And then after we've got those kind of things nailed down, we then start thinking about, okay, that's be very specific to the course, because again, there's no point in skipping nutrition and just doing your base and your race specific stuff, and then finding 5 hours into your race that actually the nutrition you've got planned doesn't work for you. It goes straight through you, either through your mouth or through your bottom, and you're really struggling. And then once we kind of got those kind of things nailed down, and I'd say for the first marathon, the first ultra marathon, probably just focus on those three. As you get more experienced, start thinking about adding a bit of threshold running and some sort of functional movement and physical prep. And the reason why I think the physical prep is quite important, because of course we're asking our body to do quite a lot during that particular race. So if you're out for 50k, 50 miler, 100k, 100 miler, 24 hour, 36-hour, whatever it be, your body's got to cope with quite a lot of load, a lot of demand. And if it's a hilly course, your muscles have got to be strong enough, your quads, your calves, your hams, your glutes have got to be strong enough to cope with that load as well. So having that kind of functional movement and physical preparation phase, including in your training, I think is vitally important as well. But certainly for the early stages, the first three for me, most important ones would be to get the base, the nutrition, and then the cost specific in that kind of order. So why is functional movement important? Well, if you think about it, you're going to amass a significantly larger amount of training over your running career compared to, say, somebody who does your local park runs or a 10K, half marathon, even a marathoner in most cases. You're going to take on a significant lot more load. So from that point of view, if you've got some fundamental functional movement issues, so you've got some biomechanical issues, some mobility issues, that's going to likely lead to you having a higher chance of picking up an injury with that repetitive movements that we do. And the physical prep in itself, it helps there because it helps to strengthen the body, to make it, what's the phrase we want to use really for this? That muscular stiffness that we need. And I'm not talking about range of motion stiffness, but that where it can be nice and tight when it needs to be nice and stiff. So it's not too soft, it's just nice and stiff, got the right amount of strength in there to propel you forward, so your muscles don't kind of break down too early. I always recommend that if you are new to ultra running, that you undergo some sort of functional movement screening. Now, maybe your local coach can do that, and they can highlight some areas where you maybe need to work on there. You might see that you favour your right side over your left side. When you get a little bit fatigued, you might notice there's a bit of a hip drop going on. All of this kind of stuff that you can find from doing some functional movement screening, and your coach, or if you do it yourself, you can then find those areas that you need to work on and then start building a very specific physical training program around addressing those issues that you find. And then I would also recommend for most runners, to be fair, to do it at least once a year, to screen yourself anyway, because during that year things may have changed. You may have picked up a slight niggle or an injury, say in February or March, that didn't necessarily take you out of training, but just adjusted your biomechanics slightly. So then you spent maybe 2 or 3 months training in a particular way that just slightly adjusted your biomechanics, and therefore you've taken your load slightly different, and all of a sudden you're finding that hip drop's come back, or that Achilles is starting to play up a little bit more than usual, or you've noticed a little bit more tightness in the trunk even, all of these kind of things. So I would recommend that for most people, you do it at least once a year, if not twice a year. For myself, I'll do it twice a year. Sadly, I don't do enough work on it, so I tend not to see much change in that. And I guess that's something I'm going to have to address myself going forward. But I definitely, bear that in mind. One thing to bear in mind, though, that when you do bring in this kind of physical prep stuff, if it's a new stimulus to you as an athlete or the athletes that you work with, you may need to, in the early days, drop a little bit of the volume of the run training. So say, for argument's sake, your typical run training week is 50 miles of running, and then you suddenly throw in your 2 sessions of physical prep on top of that 50 miles of running. You're going to be adding in a lot of extra muscular strain that the muscles may struggle with, and you're probably going to increase your likelihood of picking up an injury. So what I always say to people is, when you first bring in that physical prep, drop your volume down a little bit whilst you're bringing that in a little bit, and then slowly bring that volume up over a period of probably 3 to 4 weeks, really. And then once you got through that 4th week, you should be okay to be back to where you would be normally. And it's quite important to do that, because what you don't want to do is suddenly start doing some strength training, keep your load as it was normally, and then suddenly injure yourself. It's a big mistake I often see made with a lot of sort of newer or inexperienced runners when they're bringing that kind of thing in. I need to be a stronger athlete, I'll bring it in, and then do some sort of running boot camp, and find themselves injured very quickly. So we'll talk very briefly about the sharper end of running. So, of course, there are opportunities for those people at the sharper end where you can earn an England vest and hopefully go on to attain a GB vest as well. So, as I mentioned earlier at the start, I'm the team manager for the England team at the Anglo-Celtic Plate 100K. So, I know there's options in there. Typical kind of qualification criteria, let's be fair, for a female we're looking around about a 2:45 marathoner, and for a male around about a 2:30 marathoner. So for a lot of people on the call, that's probably going to exclude you straight away. However, that might be today, but you don't know where you're going to be in 3, 4, 5 years time. You know, we really don't know where you're going to be. You could be that untapped gem that suddenly comes through with a good quality load of training and be actually someone knocking on the door. And then from there, of course, we've got the IAU, International Association of Ultra Runners, World and European Championships that we always have a GB team at. And of course, there's a 50k, 100k, 24-hour. And then, of course, we do have the Trail World Championships. So there are kind of opportunities for those people at the sharper end. And there is going to be more and more stuff coming out about that, particularly around the Anglo-Celtic Plate stuff, because I believe there's an Anglo-Celtic Plate Association forming at the moment that's going to try to drive forward more opportunities within that kind of environment of the home nations. And in the home nations, we also include Ireland itself. So it's not just Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England. We also include Ireland as well, because if we go back historically, many, many years ago, there was kind of part of the Anglo-Celtic nations indirectly through some sort of political hierarchy. So we find that we've also got to Ireland in as well, which is a great welcome for that. Sadly, this year there was no Anglo-Celtic Plate this year, and there's no 24-hour, no 100k, and no 50k this year because of COVID. But there's some options there for people who are looking at more at the sharp end. Some useful books that you can find yourself reading that I think are worthwhile having a look at. Ultra Marathon Training Essentials. I have a similar book. In fact, I've got that second book there next to me here. This is a great resource, actually. It's got some really good tips on nutrition, some things about pacing. It's a really good resource. Thoroughly recommend getting that one. That's that Ultra Running by Jason Coop. That's a really good one. That running your first ultra. That's a great one. Lots of good advice in there, as well as I think I've got somewhere to hang, but I don't know where. Hal's Field Guide to Ultra Running. That is a great resource as well. Really good. Hal explains a lot of things. Very, very simple. And he's even better, got some training plans in the back there. So if you're wondering what kind of training volume you should be taking, it's got 50k training plans, 50 miles, 100k, and 100 miler sort of documented in there. So that's really, really useful book to have for those people that are quite new to ultra running and aren't quite sure where to go for the training and stuff. So what next? So as I said, you can ping me for ultra running related queries at dreevil@englandathletics.org. As I mentioned in the chat earlier on, I am the ultra lead for England Athletics. So you've got any kind of questions around ultra, by all means, feel free to reach out to me. If I don't have the answer, I can always put you in touch with somebody who has the answer, because that's the beauty when we kind of work at England Athletics, is we have lots of contacts as well. There are lots of other webinars. I've put some webinars up in the past around this kind of stuff, which you can get from the Athletics Hub. And of course, if you're thinking of sort of some coaching criteria, so you want to maybe develop yourself as a coach, there's some coaching opportunities there as well. But for me, I think the key resource there is that Athletics Hub. There's lots of great webinars. There's things on physical prep. There's marathon. There's nutrition. We've got ultra running stuff. There's lots of endurance kind of stuff. So do we have mental strategies to aid for longer distances? 30 miles is a lot longer than 26 in my head. Yeah, for sure. And I think it's about, first things first, is breaking it down into manageable chunks. Because for a 5K or a 10K, even a half marathoner, 26.2 miles is a long way. It's a long way. So when you start going 30 miles, or you go longer, so you go to maybe 50K or 50 miles, 100K, of course, you look at it as a big chunk and say, hang on a minute, I'm here to race 30 miles. That's a long way. Last time I did my marathon 2 years ago, I detonated at mile 18 and I really struggled at the back end. This is going to be daunting. It's about breaking it down into manageable chunks. It's that, how do you eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time. That's how you should approach your race strategy. Take it into small chunks. Try and where you can stay in the moment and not think about the big thing. Don't think about how many miles you've got to go, but just think more about the miles that you've clocked off. As your race kind of progresses on, you count down your miles rather than count them than sort of saying, I've got 15 miles to go. You'll say, oh, I've just done 15 miles. That's great. I've done 16 miles. So you kind of count up from that rather than sort of saying how many I've got to go. And it's also finding those little strategies, of zenness a little bit, where you maybe find a little mantra that works for you when you're starting to struggle a little bit. I've used that before, and I know plenty of people use that. But for me, really the key thing is just break it into smaller chunks. So you don't think of 30 miles, you think purely of this next 5-10 minute section, or break it into nutrition chunks. I'm taking nutrition every 40 minutes. So right, my next nutrition break is 30 minutes away. I've got to focus on that. That's the kind of way to sort of break it down, I guess. That's it works for most people. Any specific form changes over the longer distance? Yes. If you look at the shorter distance stuff, so someone's running a 5K, they tend to have a nice long stride, particularly the elite level, maybe less so on the non-elite level. So what we tend to see is it becomes more of a shuffle. So it's about the pace that you're running at, I guess. The slower the pace, the narrower the gait tends to be. So we tend to see a narrowing of the gait and a faster cycling of the legs tends to be, which controls the pace, really. So what I'd expect to see is a slight narrowing of your running gait. And you probably won't even do it consciously. It'd be very subconscious. So as you slow down, so if I asked you tomorrow to run 8-minute miles and we videoed you and analysed that gait, then I said to you, right now go run at 12-minute miles, and we analysed that gait, you'd probably notice a couple of very obvious differences, specifically around your turnover of your legs, your running cycle, but also the length of the gait. So that's what I'd expect to see.